Who is the MMA GOAT? It's a question everyone asks, and the same top 5 names usually dominate the list. But today, we're taking a different approach. We're looking at who left the greatest MMA legacy of all time. Who is the most respected fighter among fans and fighters alike? But before we give our list, I need to explain how we scored our top 10 picks. And don't forget to comment below with who you think has the best legacy in your opinion. So the scoring criteria is number 1, public perception. I think that's obviously the most important thing.
I think, it was by far like who is most synonymous with being like the best UFC fighter, but also like, are they in the good books? Who's the most loved by the fans? Like obviously the biggest loved fighters of all time, most of them are going to be in the GOAT conversation.
Exactly. Next, titles won or defended. I think in terms of a GOAT list versus a legacy list, titles defended is very important because it's almost like a trophy.
Well, I think also with that one, it was just like with the titles won and defended, I just made sure that this person had a bunch of title defenses. They won a bunch of titles. And then from there, I was like, all right, I can pick my order based on how much they're respected and stuff. But then you also do have to take that into account.
Yeah. Next, participation in iconic moments or fights. I think, it's tough because you have people like Conor McGregor who aren't necessarily the best fighter of all time and probably not even close, but they just have so many participation in iconic moments. They're part of everything.
Every fight with Conor was just like, it's like if you make the top 10 biggest UFC moments of all time, it's like 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them are all Conor clips.
And next we have stat records and win percentages, pretty self-explanatory. And I just want to highlight strength of schedule is less important in this ranking.
If you're looking for a GOAT list, this isn't the place to look. We have like an hour and a half long video where we talk about the top 15 GOATs. We have our own list.
All right, let's get into our ranking. We've waffled enough. At number 10, I'll go first. I have someone who, again, I'm not sure if this person's going to be on your list. I don't know if we're going to have any of the same. Alex Pereira.
He's not on my list. He's one of my honorable mentions.
So close. Like, he's right up there, number 10 or 11. There's a bunch of guys I was thinking of. His record is 12-2 in MMA. Honestly, like a pretty good record, even though he's had hardly any fights. His notable fights, obviously his win over Izzy, 2 in kickboxing, 1 in MMA. And Sean Strickland, and then you have all of those title defenses at light heavyweight, Jan Blachowicz, etc. Everyone knows by now. Accomplishments, I mean, he's been a 2-time weight division in Glory and in the UFC. He is genuinely just a once-in-a-generation kickboxing athlete. I wouldn't say MMA athlete because he hasn't been brought up in mixed martial arts, but it's translated well. And I think when you talk about public perception, I don't know if there's anyone who has a better public perception,
especially right now, like just what he does right now, like his worldwide tour, basically. He's a worldwide icon for the UFC right now.
In terms of titles won, like he does have that enough titles where I was like, okay, it's validated. He has a couple defenses. He's won both middleweight and light heavyweight. That counts for quite a lot. In terms of iconic moments and events, that Izzy quadrilogy, it's one of the most hyped things ever, like in recent MMA history. So I think that's pretty iconic. Also, UFC 300, he headlined that. That's iconic. Save 303. At the time, that was pretty iconic, and the way he finished it. So I feel like he's just building and building and building and building momentum. And he has a good stat record. So I think it's fair.
All right, moving on to my number 10, a guy I mentioned a couple minutes ago. I have Islam Makhachev here.
Okay.
I think with Islam, with him still being active, you don't get the same legacy perception that you do with like a guy who's retired, or even the other active guys I have on my list that are like towards the tail end of their careers, because Islam realistically can still go for 5 more years, whereas some of the other guys who are going to be on the list later, they're already like, they're not in their prime anymore. Islam's still in his prime. So it's hard to like take into account like his legacy when he's still fighting and he still could do better, and also with Islam is that his big thing is that his quality of wins is unreal. Like he doesn't have the quantity, he doesn't have the counting numbers like some of the other guys that are going to be on this list, but his quality is unreal. The 2 wins over Volk, Charles, Poirier, like it's just unreal. Even the Armin early on has aged so greatly, but he just doesn't have the counting numbers. And like, I find that it's hard to consider a guy who's still active. I think if you went and asked a bunch of people, because he's still active, he's going to be slightly lower in terms of legacy. Whereas in 2 years, he could realistically be number 1 or 2 on this list in 2 years' time.
Yeah, if he keeps on beating number 1 contenders plus wins a welterweight belt. Oh gosh.
Oh, he's cooked.
and doesn't have any controversy, I think he's probably up there for sure. That was my runner-up. That was my number 11th pick. So moving on to number 9, Max Holloway. Great record, 26-8, 11 KOs. Notable fights, he has wins over Aldo 2 times, Brian Ortega, Calvin Kattar, and the rivalry with Alex Volkanovski, which he lost 3 times, unfortunately. That alone is iconic, right? That trilogy is such an iconic moment in MMA. His public perception, again, up there with Alex Pereira currently right now, especially after that KO over Gaethje and just how long he's been in the sport, how many greats he's defeated. His title run, his title defenses were unbelievable. It's kind of weird. You go back and featherweight has such a deep history. Like Max Holloway defending that belt and then still being top level until this day, but just can't get it back because of the competition.
Yeah, it's unreal.
And then in terms of participation in iconic moments, I think his Gaethje KO at 300, that's going to live in history forever. Like that just cements him. His records and his win percentages is great. He's only lost to the very, very, very elite fighters later on in his career, and he has a great strength of schedule as well. So I think it's a valid pick. I could see him even higher, honestly.
He's a guy that I have higher, and who knows with that one how much of it is my personal bias with him being one of my favorite fighters of all time. You know, so obviously I'm going to rank him a little bit higher just because I love him so much, and my public perception of him is like, I mean, I'm going to talk about it later, but like one of the most beloved fighters of all time while still being one of the GOATs.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to my number 9. A guy who I found very tough to rank, Daniel Cormier. Because I think that everyone has this perception of Daniel Cormier as being the good guy from the Jones-DC rivalry.
Fat guy.
The fat, nice guy, you know? And I think his legacy also continues to build with him now being on commentary. But that's not saying that he isn't one of the best fighters of all time. He's in the top 10, 11, 12 best UFC fighters of all time, and he just happened to be unlucky and be in the same division as the greatest fighter of all time. You know, he does have big wins. You know, he has wins over Derek Lewis, Stipe, Ozdemir. He beat Anderson Silva. You know, he beat basically everyone outside of John Jones, and then the 2 losses to Stipe at the tail end of his career, you know? And with him is he had a lot of title wins, a lot of title defenses, and then John Jones would come and spoil that.
Yeah.
You know? So I think with his terms of his legacy, like I think everyone has respect for him, especially with the way that John Jones's age or career has aged, you know, with all the allegations of him cheating. Like the only guy he ever really truly lost to until Stipe was a cheater.
Right.
You know, so it's like, oh, he could have been so good if Jones wasn't cheating.
Right.
You know, so people have this perception of him in their minds where, wait, he was actually a lot better, you know, and they really respect him for going up and putting up these awesome efforts against a guy like John Jones.
Yeah, my number 8 guy is DC, so pretty similar thinking. 22 wins, 3 losses, really great record in total. Notable fights, you already mentioned Stipe, Derek Lewis, Gustafsson. That's a great win. And then the rivalry with John Jones for iconic moments, that is top 2 iconic rivalries of all time.
Yeah.
The press conferences and just the actual hatred between them. It doesn't really get much better than that in terms of an MMA rivalry. And then also his strength of schedule was good. Public perception is pretty great. It's either like I'd say 90% of people love him, and then there's like 10% that really don't like him.
And the 10% of the people that have soured on him from modern day commentary.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even the fighting, it's the commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's surprising though, because he was a wrestler, but I don't see him being called boring very much. He was always super active with it.
Well, it's a fat boy.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a fat boy.
True. So yeah, I'm at number 8. You already said everything. I agree with it.
All right, moving on to my number 8. A guy that I think if you asked a guy who was double my age, you know, I'm going to tell you how old I am, but you guys can infer about that. But if you asked a guy who was double my age,
65?
they'd probably close. But they'd have him much higher than I do. It's a guy that I just think is genuinely one of the most overrated fighters. I mean, it's hard to be overrated when I still have him in the top 10.
Yeah.
People have him higher, but it's Jose Aldo.
Okay.
You know, I think the public perception of Jose Aldo is that, you know, best featherweight of all time, you know, like the old heads, oh, he's better than Vulcan Holloway, when in reality, you could make the argument that there's 4 featherweights ahead of him. You know, him and Connor, you know, he can be 4, Connor can be 5, but I'd say Ilya, Max, and Volk are all ahead of him. And this was why it was so tough to rank with Aldo, was because he did have this super long title run, this legendary title run for its time. But after that, it fell off a cliff. You know, like he couldn't get a big win. You know, he was a guy that was in that top 5, but couldn't beat anyone in the top 5. And for me, it was just he didn't have the names. And I know that strength of schedule isn't that important, but like he also just didn't have iconic moments. And the iconic moments he was a part of, where he was on the backside of it.
Yeah, he was on the receiving end.
You know, he's on the receiving end of one of the most legendary KOs of all time. But he's on the receiving end of it.
Yeah.
You know, and he was just a tough one to rank. And I just think that if you're asking a casual MMA fan, Jose Aldo is not mentioned in the same way. You're like, name one UFC fighter. He's not mentioned as much as the guys ahead of him.
Yeah. And if they do know him, like a very casual fan, they know him from Conor McGregor knocking him out.
Yeah.
So that's totally fair. At my number 7 pick, I have John Jones.
Ooh.
Public perception is down, bro.
Yeah.
It was bad with the cheating allegations, the drug use, the abuse and all that stuff. But now even he's ducking the number 1 contender, the interim champ. It's like, it's gone from bad to worse. And then also the whole MMA guru allegations there, like it was pretty convincing, honestly. Obviously, you know, take it as you will, but his public perception is in trash. And so even though he has, you know, incredible title wins and title defenses, 16?
Yeah,
I
he's
think
the best fighter of all time.
Yeah, participation in iconic moments. He has the rivalry with DC. He has the wins at light heavyweight and heavyweight now. And then his return, even Cyril Gahn just choking him out, like that was pretty iconic in the time. Gustafsson, those are great wins. He's done everything in the sport, really. Like in our GOAT list, he was number 1. Sorry to spoil it for you. But in MMA legacy, public perception is in the bin. It's bad.
It's gone. I'll talk about him a little bit more later. He's coming up in the near future. But for now, at number 7, I'm going to talk about Anderson Silva. You know, this is one of the guys, he's another one that's so tough to rank in the GOAT list because at his peak, he was on this legendary title run. And then after that title run, he just kind of whoop. Yeah. It was a downhill from there.
7 fights.
Yeah. But we still have this public perception as Anderson Silva being he was one of the pillars that built up MMA in its early days. You know, he was one of the OG legendary fighters. You know, for a long time, he probably was the GOAT of the UFC and of MMA because he was that legendary to the sport. And I think with him is, you know, he's very similar to Aldo. You know, is that they were so great and then it kind of fell from there, but they're so synonymous with the upbringing. And I just kind of had Anderson Silva being a little bit more well-known. You know, you ask a random person like, oh yeah, I know who Anderson Silva is.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that he's never really had anything to scuff up his perception, but also like even at the end, he was losing to top guys. You know, he was losing to DC. He was losing to Adesanya. You know, he wasn't out there fighting trash cans. You know, he was hyping up and building resumes of the next up-and-coming stars inside of the UFC. And yeah, he was just genuinely one of the best strikers of all time at his time.
That's interesting. You have Aldo and Silva pretty low, so I'm interested to see who you have higher because I can't even think of anyone who's much higher than that.
The guys that I haven't mentioned yet.
All right, we'll see. Moving on to our number 6 spot, I have Jose Aldo. Record 31-9, 17 KOs. A good record, very solid. But again, he's kind of going 1 for 1 right now. It's tough to move up the bantamweight rankings. Notable fights, wins over Chad Mendes 2 times. That's great. Frankie Edgar, Uriah Faber, all very solid wins. But like you said, once he gets to that top elite level featherweights, can't win against Holloway, can't win against Volk. And if we ever saw him against Taporia, it'd be lights out for good. Accomplishments, 9 successful title defenses. That is just unbelievable. Like when you talk about titles won and defended, which is a pretty big part of my rankings, it doesn't really get much better than that. Obviously, you have Anderson Silva, who I haven't mentioned yet, so he's going to be a little bit higher. In terms of participation in iconic moments, yeah, you're right. He was on UFC 200, but that Frankie Edgar performance wasn't the highlight of the night for me. And then you have the Conor McGregor moment, which he was a part of, and then didn't go his way. So yeah, it's tough. Aldo had obviously a great career and was considered the featherweight GOAT, and even by some people still is. But in my opinion, he just doesn't stack up. Even like when you ask a casual fan that started watching in the last 10 years, I don't think they're putting Aldo in the top of the GOAT conversation or in terms of a respected conversation. Like, it really depends on where in the world you're from.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Rio. pretty much.
All right, moving on to my number 6, a guy that I said I had more to talk about, John Jones. You know, I think the same stuff about John Jones, the same narratives are constantly talked about. But one thing that I think has also tainted his reputation is the win over Dominic Reyes. You know, it's probably the most synonymous robbery and most famous robbery in UFC history. You know, like there is so many people that believe that was an actual loss for John Jones. And then you have his no contest, and then like it's just, and like the 12-6 elbows. It just, his history is just so tainted that it's just so hard to have him any higher when he's by far, I mean, it's hard to say by far, but like the only reason that GSP is in that conversation for being the GOAT is strictly because of the poor perception and the allegations around John Jones.
Right.
You know, that's the only reason that GSP is even ever talked about.
Yeah.
You know, if John Jones had the clean slate, no one would ever talk about it. He would be undoubtedly the GOAT of UFC, but because of everything. And it just piles and piles and piles, and it just keeps on going. You know, you'd think that he would learn, but he just refuses to. And it just, every year there's something new. It's no different than Conor. He was just a lot better than Conor.
Yeah. Well,
So-
I mean, it just shows who you really are if you can't change. Like,
Yeah.
you can't keep going back to your old ways and have people defend you. There's no defending him.
Exactly.
At this point. You just have to accept that he's great fighter, bad person.
Yeah.
It is what it is. All right, let's move on to the top 5 seeds. Volk at my number 5 spot. I think I had him pretty similar in the GOAT list, maybe 5 or 4. Record 26-4, great record. Like only lost to Ilia Topuria in featherweight in the UFC, and then had those 2 back-to-back losses against Makhachev, which maybe really hurt his career. We'll see how he does going forward. Notable fights: wins over Max Holloway 3 times, Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega. He has great wins over all of the top featherweights, Yair Rodriguez included. In terms of accomplishments, he had 5 successful title defenses in the modern era. Crazy impressive. And then went up and challenged for that belt. Arguably had like a very close decision in the moment. People thought he won because of how it ended. But then looking back, it's like, okay, no, he put up a good defense. Fair enough. But he didn't win that fight. If he did, man, how times would have changed.
Yeah.
You know, he might be top 2 GOAT. Like, it'd be crazy how the story could have changed. But I think if you talk about public perception, what he does on his YouTube channel, in his promotion, after his fights, like, he genuinely is just like one of the best guys in the UFC. I think if you had to pick someone to sit down with for dinner, a UFC fighter, I think he's probably like top of my list. I think it's pretty like obvious. He could be way higher if on your list. Like, I wouldn't put that against you, but I think in terms of title defenses, he doesn't have quite as many of like the old head fighters.
Yeah. Well, it's just also different MMA. Like, it's a different UFC nowadays. And
Oh,
you
100%.
But moving on to my number 5, Volk's greatest rival. It's hard to call them rivals, but it's Max Holloway. I think for me, with Max, is just nowadays he is one of the most beloved fighters. You know, he's probably in that top 3 with guys like Charles and Dustin. You know, loved by everyone, but he's been loved by everyone for so long. Like, he has just throughout his whole career been loved by MMA and UFC fans alike. And you know what? He does have those big losses. He has the 3 losses to Volk, and he has the loss to Conor, and the loss to Poirier, and the loss to Topuria. But he's also been on the other side of some of the most iconic moments in UFC history. That KO, like we talked about earlier, going to go down in history as one of the greatest knockouts of all time. You know,
And we got to witness it live.
Exactly.
So crazy.
But then you also have like his performance against Calvin Kattar, another legendary performance. And just like, I think even like that Korean Zombie win was legendary. Like, just so many legendary moments from this guy's career. And for me, there's probably some bias here. You know what? If like I have Max higher just because I think that he was better than Silva and Aldo. And in terms of modern UFC fighters, there's very few fighters who have the same legacy and the same respect that Max Holloway has. And he kind of just had that attitude of he's going to fight everyone. You know, if he pick and chose his fights better, maybe he doesn't lose as much, you know, but he fought everyone, you know, and it's also a totally different story if he ever beat Volk, you know, like that would have been legendary if he finally got it done against Volk, you know, but he didn't. And that's the world we live in. But I'm still going to have
There's still time.
Yeah, that is true. But I'm still just going to have him top 5 because in terms of my era of UFC, he's one of the most respected fighters.
Imagine they both move up to lightweight. Max versus Volk 4 quadrilogy.
Can you imagine?
They would troll us like that just to make us mad.
They'd have to double retirement after that.
All right, moving on to the number 4 spot, I have Anderson Silva. He was one of the greatest fighters. I think in his time, he was considered the GOAT by almost everybody. He changed the game of striking. He was picking guys apart like they weren't even supposed to be in the UFC. We talk about the level of UFC rising, which is definitely true, but the way that he just dominated people and the head movement, the striking, like he was years and years and years and years above what he should have been in the UFC, even if it was guys training out of their garages. 34 wins, 23 KOs. Like, that's a crazy stat. He has wins over Rich Franklin, Dan Henderson, Forrest Griffin, Chael Sonnen. Obviously, everyone knows. Accomplishments, 10 consecutive middleweight title defenses. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable to have that many title defenses in a division other than like flyweight.
Yeah.
We talked about DJ 14 or something like that, but 10 in middleweight where you can get KO'd by one punch, that's impressive. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about flyweight later because we have a guy coming up. And flyweight's impressive for another reason, I think. Like the skill down there, and like you just always have to be on it. Yeah. Always have to be on it. Yeah. But middleweight, you get caught with a punch like Anderson Silva did against Chris Weidman, it's over for you, right? And if he didn't get caught, you wonder what could have been because he should have won that fight. I think he has one of the best legacies of all time, one of the most respected fighters, and maybe there's a bit of bias from Dylan and me because we didn't watch in that time.
Yeah, obviously. We were like, how old are we? Like 10? Probably younger than 10.
I don't even know.
Like, this was like a long time ago. I just think it was so interesting. We find it so exciting when fighters enter flow state for like, a round or something. This guy was just casually in flow state like every round, every single fight.
Yeah.
He was just that much better.
Yeah,
he was always had that confidence. He was always just vibing in the ring.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to my number 4. A guy you already mentioned. I say that every time, but you tend to mention guys a little bit earlier. I'm a little bit higher on some guys. Alexander Volkanovski. He was tough. I almost considered at one point, I was like, ooh, maybe this guy could be 2, just because he is that lovable, and he has those crazy title wins, the 3 wins over Max Holloway. There's very few fighters in the UFC who have 3 better wins than that. That is just forever legendary. He was part of a top 5 rivalry of all time with Max Holloway. The way that went on for so long, card after card after card. And then we also talked about like how he dominated featherweight at potentially the best era of featherweight, in terms of champions. Like featherweight was probably the best division of all time in terms of the legacy of the champions there. Yeah. And just his public perception. A lot of it is very similar to what I've said about Max. It's just like they're some of the most legendary fighters of the last 10 years, and everyone loves them. You don't have Volk haters. You don't have Holloway haters, and then Volk just obviously he's going to be ahead of Holloway. Holloway's never going to be on a list ahead of Volk.
Yeah.
And he just legendary moments.
He's stun locked.
What?
He's stun locked.
Yes, exactly.
Stun locked below Volk.
Yeah. Like if you ever have a list where Holloway's ahead of Volk, like I couldn't tell you.
No.
Height is the only thing.
Yeah.
Volk's like, I'm taller than you.
True.
Volk's like, I beat you 3 times. You ain't knocked me out though. You just wait.
Yeah.
But yeah, like great guy Volk. He's a guy that's going to be in the UFC. Once he retires, he's not leaving. He's going to stick around in some capacity, All
right. Central C. All right, let's move on to Demetrius Johnson, my number 3 pick.
I also have I think our top 3 are going to be the same, so we can kind of talk about them at the same time. I have DJ at 3 as well.
All right, so his record, it's great. In overall, 35-5.
Unreal.
That's insane.
And most of those losses were outside of the UFC.
Yeah, and notable fights, wins over Joseph Benavidez, Henry Cejudo, Kyoji Horiguchi, of course, the GOAT John Dodson, his greatest rival, some would say.
He is the greatest rival of Demetrius Johnson.
And I think in terms of iconic moments, he has the single most impressive MMA move finish of all time.
Oh, that flying armbar?
The flying armbar.
Unreal. Legendary.
That and the Showtime kick from Anthony Pettis are like the 2 most flashiest, like you show someone a clip, it's that.
Yeah.
Or the Joaquin Buckley spinning around kick and KO.
I don't like that guy.
Yeah, no, you're not showing anybody.
I ain't showing anyone that.
Don't introduce anybody to Joaquin Buckley. That's our little sneak peek at our video coming up. Or maybe it's already out. hot takes from you
guys?
guys. You guys glaze Joaquin Buckley.
I don't understand it. I think it's actually just to piss me off.
Yeah,
it's genuinely just to piss me off.
Joaquin Buckley, Sharmagomedov. Who else were they glazing that we hate?
They were hating on Carlos Prates
Oh,
and
yeah.
Shavkat just to piss us off too.
Honestly, you guys
Like they're the offs, man.
awful. Why do you watch this channel?
We include you guys in a video and then you just do that to us? Messed up, man.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what do you have to say about DJ?
I think it's so interesting with DJ is like we take into account that like strength of schedule is less important here, but he still was just that good that he's 3 on our GOAT list and then 3 on our legacy list, you know?
Yeah. No
But-
controversy.
No, never. And like he stuck around for so long and he dealt with all the crap that Dana threw his way. You know, Dana wasn't a fan. You know, this guy, if he was in a higher division, probably the GOAT or was getting pushed to the moon. Dana gave him no coverage. He treated it like women's MMA. You know, he probably treated women's MMA at that time bigger. You know, with fighters like Ronda Rousey and Amanda Nunes.
Yeah.
But just put up with it and just continue to go to work and to defend his belt and maybe potentially the most skilled UFC fighter of all time.
And then moved to a different division and won that as well.
Yeah.
At 135. So, yeah.
He's legendary.
And I think that is right. 14 title wins, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And 11 consecutive title defenses.
And if flyweight tax wasn't a thing, he could have been 1 or 2 on this list. But
Yeah.
flyweight tax exists for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very fair spot. Let's move on to number 2. Who do you have at number 2?
Conor McGregor. No, I got Nate Diaz.
Oh, right. Of course.
No, Khabib.
Yeah.
It's obviously Khabib at 2.
That's who I have.
Just the most dominant UFC fighter of all time. You know, everyone understands how good Khabib is. And I think actually, if you talk about Khabib, like his public perception, he actually gets overrated in his public perception. You know, one of the best where he's a top 5 UFC fighter, but I think that he gets pushed up there with the Joneses and the GSP and the DJ when realistically I think he's 4, but he's still in that conversation of being the best. And if you ask a real casual fan, they might say that Khabib's the best fighter of all time.
Yeah.
Most dominant fighter of all time, and it's not even close.
Yeah.
You know?
100%.
And then like the whole idea of like retiring undefeated is just like retiring at the top undefeated 29-0, just legendary. Who cares if he beat plumbers and mailmen? Strength of schedule is less important here, guys. Remember,
it's true.
And just like his stats records, his win percentages, and like he dominated in the wrestling, but he was not dominating in terms of lay and pray. You know, he is what every modern UFC fan wants out of Merab and Bilal.
True.
You know, everyone wants every wrestler to fight like Khabib. You know, we got used to watching Khabib fight and be ground and pounders, just tapping guys out left and right. Mm-hmm. But that's not the perception. That was just how good Khabib it was.
Yeah. His public perception is good as well. Retiring undefeated is super impressive. That's like, I mean, when you look at a retired fighter and you see 29 wins, 0 losses, it doesn't get more impressive than that. Yeah, like you said, strength of schedule for his first 18, 20 fights, it's not there, but it still counts on your professional record.
And
so
he's still undefeated.
And he did have good wins over Connor, Dustin, RDA, Justin. Like,
100%. And I think if we look at it, he was part of the biggest fight in UFC history. He was a headliner for the biggest pay-per-view of all time.
Yeah.
You know, like
iconic moment. Like he owns it with Connor.
Yeah. Like that rivalry is up there with DC and Jones as the greatest rivalry of all time. The amount of fans that rivalry brought in, that put UFC on like the main stage of sports, you know? It moved from a niche sport to a mainstay in terms of the sporting world.
Yeah. I hope we get a fight like that in our lifetime. Just one time, please. Jones versus Aspinall. It's not as big.
It's not even close.
No.
It's not even close. There's Ilya and someone.
Yeah, maybe.
Ilya and someone. Come on.
But they'd have to have bad blood. Like, you know? I feel like if they did Ilya versus Islam, that's a great matchup. And it could be, like, it would be more skilled than Khabib versus Conor and probably more competitive. But are they going to have the same build-up and hatred? Yeah. Like, how can you recreate that?
You can't get that. You can't get the most calm UFC fighter of all time, like the most calm, cool, collected, never done anything bad, spit on the guy and then hop the cage to try to fight Dylan Dennis. Like,
Tua.
Like, was that, like, that's how real this got.
Yeah. Like,
Khabib's not the type of person to do that. Like, he was probably the last person in the UFC that you would ever think to do that. And the next thing, you know, this fast ass mother trucker is just over the fence.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, who knows? You know, Ilya likes to copy Connor, so maybe he could bring it out of Islam.
Maybe.
You never know. I could see Khabib like just getting triggered.
Maybe Suga and Umar. Like if there was some general hate there, like you never know. But Suga might be a little too soft. Like,
yeah.
Even like soft boy.
Yeah. Sean O'Malley can't hold his own. All right, should we move on to our next
Number
person?
one.
GSP.
Oh, Canada.
Oh, say
Can you see? Go down to the comments right now. I sing before every video or sometimes mid video. If you want Dodson's Corner Dylan Rose singing special, just let me know.
An album?
An album of all my best clips.
Yeah, double-sided album. 24 tracks.
Vinyl, and I'll sign it for you too.
$300. Yeah, I mean, he has a great record, 26-2, avenged both of his losses. 8 KOs, 6 submissions, wins over Matt Hughes, BJ Penn, Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, Michael Bisping. Came back a couple years later, won the middleweight belt, a division up. He's a small middleweight.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't even a massive welterweight. So for him to do that, let's be honest, Michael Bisping maybe like wasn't the most dominant middleweight champion, but you can't cherry pick. Buddy. 9 welterweight title defenses, 2 division champion, like 9 defenses in welterweight. Again, it's like even better than Anderson Silva's wins.
Oh,
he was fighting much higher level guys, in my opinion, for the time. And his public perception is unmatched. The best.
Yeah.
When people say true mixed martial artist, they think of him.
Yeah, and I think he is the guy that the UFC wishes was the GOAT. You know? He's the guy you want as the cover boy of a sport, you know. This guy was the most respected fighter of all time. You know, there was never anything ill against him. You know, he wasn't getting into these scrums. He wasn't getting into these allegations. Like, he literally had like no specks of dirt on him. He was that clean. And it was just like his pure dominance while also being such an amazing role model. Mm-hmm. You know, like he is the person that best represents the UFC.
Yeah.
Not Connor, not John Jones. It's GSP best represents the UFC.
Yeah. I think the one thing that he might be lacking is his participation in iconic moments.
Yeah.
Like his wins over Matt Hughes are great, but I don't know if there's like one moment where you can point to and say, that's iconic GSP. I mean, I think his headband is
the headband, or like his walkout when he came back.
His walkout's iconic.
His walkout might be the most iconic thing about him.
Yeah.
Especially the one when he came back to fight for that middleweight belt. Like
it
was like, oh crap.
He's back.
He's back.
I love the gi. Wearing the gi is so cool. Mm-hmm. So cool. Yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, it's obvious. I think most people would have GSP. I could see an argument for Connor being really high as well. Like just because of every fight he has is iconic, but it's like same thing with John Jones. You've tarnished it so much, and you're not even like a GOAT.
Yeah, Connor's a top 25 fighter of all time, maybe
if he's lucky on a good
30.
Day. Yeah,
you know. All right, that is gonna wrap it up for us today. Go down to the comments. Let us know who you guys think the most legendary fighters of all time are. Who has the best legacy? Do you agree with our list? If you don't, let us know your list, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
See ya.